Hello everyone, Jules here from WhatCulture.com, and I want to talk to you today about EA, or more specifically about the franchises that it's killed that could have made them absolutely tons of money. And trust me, EA is good at making money. The FIFA license alone pulls more green than Miss Piggy giving Kermit a hand shandy, yet there have been countless examples of where EA hasn't just dropped the ball, but they've shot the other players so that the game can't continue anyway. Good stuff. So what I'm here to do today is to help them out a bit, remind them of some of the franchises that they still have the licenses for that would make them ridiculous amounts of money if handled properly. So let's have a chat. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game franchises that EA killed that would have made them millions. Number 10, SSX. We begin by talking about one of my favourite snowboarding franchises, and say it with me, kids, of all time, SSX. When this game hit the slopes, it turned heads with its balance of arcadey fun and tricks. Then things got utterly brilliant and monumentally silly with SSX Tricky and SSX 3. Here the franchise was running on quite a different type of white powder, offering absolutely mind-bending courses, a trick system that was uber and contained more sick air than a hospital ward. Then the problems began. SSX on Tour removed a lot of the freedom that 3 had introduced, Blur tacked on motion controls, and the SSX 2012 reboot promised great things but ultimately couldn't find the right tone. And tone was the thing that sold this game. SSX Tricky had an attitude that was entirely its own, and if EA went back to the drawing board, it's this game which they should seek to emulate. If it could, then you might have a hit which could snowball into an avalanche of a return. Number 9, Fight Night. Weirdly, Fight Night is one franchise that seems to have been scrubbed from the record books without actually seeing that much of a dip in demand, as the last entry in the series, Fight Night Champion, was received really well with critics and fans alike. So why has it been given the KO by EA? Well, some speculate it's because of the licensing fees that are needed for such a game, but it might be something much more simple and possibly more depressing, that EA simply just makes more money off the UFC titles. And while this is very true, the boxing video game market is pretty much devoid of any flagship title. Therefore, if EA did just release one a year, it would still be getting the lion's share of the sales. It seems like a no-brainer not to continue, and while I personally hate yearly releases, there is a core audience here that's being left, much like the recent boxing match between Logan Paul and KSI, with a truly disappointing conclusion. Number 8, Medal of Honor. This entry reeks of EA actively trying to get rid of the IP as soon as they saw the first sign of trouble, and when the rebooted, and many would argue unfairly dismissed, last Medal of Honor title didn't turn heads, EA sent it shipping in favour of following Battlefield as its premier shooter. Don't get me wrong, the 2012 Warfighter game was not the best, filled with bugs, a bland multiplayer and a laughable script, but the 2010 reboot itself was actually pretty refreshing when it stood alongside the outlandish stylings of Call of Duty. What they had was a brilliant start for a franchise with a game that was different enough to check out. But EA put a bullet in the head with Warfighter. EA at least took some of the blame for Warfighter's poor quality, citing an execution problem as the major contribution to the failure. Yet instead of trying to fix these problems, the franchise instead has just been left in stasis. We might see a resurgence if Battlefield continues to dip in terms of returns, as we've already seen with its most recent effort, but as it stands, it's just another franchise that's been thrown under the bus. Number 7, Skate. There's a reason why Skate 4's potential announcement is a topic that crops up every year like clockwork. It is a series loved and adored by many who just want to grind more lengthy pipes than even your mum does after she's had a sip of that cooking sherry she keeps in the toilet. Skate 3 took this series down a natural path by doubling down on how to approach lines and trick routes, allowing you to build your own ramps as well as explore the large in-game world, hunting for the best possible proving grounds, and then obviously throwing yourself off the top of them to make the most of the great in-game ragdoll system. With Tony Hawk grinding to a halt and pissing its own pants for fear of what to do next, and still managing to shift some reasonable units, EA are in the perfect position to capitalize on this market. They have the audience, they have the product that the audience wants, and, well, they've chosen to do nothing with it. Number 6, Dungeon Keeper. This one still stings, as I played a lot of Dungeon Keeper growing up, so to see it farmed out, dumbed down, and thoroughly dragged through the mud like it was when Dungeon Keeper Mobile dropped, it was definitely painful to witness. Worse still was EA's party line on why the game failed, with EA's head of mobile stating, I think we might have innovated too much or tried some different things that people just weren't ready for. I'll tell you what we weren't ready for. We weren't ready for paywalls, monetization of every little detail, and a bastardization of Bullfrog's classic title. However, we were ready for a Dungeon Keeper game. And if EA had respected the lineage of that title and not tried to make it a Clash of Clans clone, it might be sitting on another slow-burning but successful franchise. Number 5, SimCity. This one still stings, as I played a lot of SimCity growing up, so to see it farmed out, dumbed down, and thoroughly dragged through the mud like it was when it... Wait, this is feeling awfully familiar. This game is what you would find if you looked up the term launch disaster in the dictionary, with EA's strict always-online policy for the soft reboot resulting in service threatening to implode under the strain of thousands of login requests, turning what should have been a victory for Maxis into a total nightmare. And you know what, while you could have a pop at the limited build space, SimCity was a good game, or at least one that could have been if it was allowed post-launch updates of significant worth. However, EA only saw the issue, an issue that they had created and just left the series to stagnate, while also leaving another IP bursting with potential absolutely dead in the water. Number 4, Command & Conquer. Command & Conquer 4's disposal of traditional base building in favour of a pseudo-mobile framework, Generals 2's ill-received intention of asking players for money to unlock in-game content, and of course, last year's Rivals mobile game have proven, time and time again, that EA hasn't the faintest idea of what to do with Westwood's iconic creation. And the answer is just so painfully simple. Just make a Command & Conquer game, for Christ's sake. Don't insult the series' grassroots PC fans with a watered-down mobile spin-off. Don't try and monetize the living daylights out of content already in the game. Bring back base building, strategic resource management, and just for me, get Ric Flair back in to wrestle a bear again. That was just absolutely brilliant. Do all of that, and you might find C&C on the lips of armchair generals once more. Number 3, Battlefield Bad Company. Physical sales of last year's Battlefield 5 were less than half that of its 2016 predecessor. Well, in truth, many reasons, which were in no way helped by the now quoted line of, "If you don't like it, don't buy it," with which we responded with, "Okay, we won't then." This, plus franchise fatigue setting in and a series that seems to be running short of innovation, has left Battlefield a little exposed on the front lines. Yet there is a painfully easy solution to the problem just sitting on the benches, itching to be called up again. And that is 2010's Battlefield Bad Company 2, a purposefully scaled down affair in order to accommodate to consoles, and it remains one of the most fondly remembered entries in this series to date, both for its tighter focus and for being the first instance of a Battlefield title to feature environmental destruction. Now, it might seem utter madness to suggest that things get scaled back in order to proceed, especially when EA is definitely of the bigger is better rule of thumb, but this might be the shot in the arm that it needs rather than the knife in the back that the series spin-off actually received. Number 2, Burnout. So let's just say that you're a games publisher in control of a studio responsible for the greatest open-world sandbox racer of a generation. Off the back of this success, do I, EA, offer you congratulations and greenlight a sequel, or do I reduce the developer to little more than a jobber? For reasons that still elude everyone to this day, EA opted to shoot for scenario B, disallowing Criterion from going anywhere near supercars and vehicular destruction post-Burnout paradise, tasking it instead with putting together the multiplayer components for DICE's various shooters. Okay then. In fact, the closest that we got was in 2013 when it was allowed to be the co-developer of Need for Speed Rivals, which, lest we not forget, was also really highly rated. So why, oh why, does EA sleep on this studio and the Burnout franchise? I have no idea, but then again, I'm not one of the mad eggs that work there. I'm just trying to make them a load of money. And number 1, Dead Space. Dead Space 3 is responsible for cutting short Isaac Clarke's crusade against the Necromorphs, and to that, there is no counter-argument. But was its failure a result of Visceral losing its way, or just another example of EA sticking its nose in where it wasn't needed? Well, the answer isn't as obvious as you'd expect, and while Visceral wasn't innocent in causing Dead Space's downfall, it was the publisher's meddling, specifically forcing the adoption of more action-oriented gameplay and the inclusion of microtransactions, that definitely made it think faster. In fact, had Visceral simply been left to its own devices, Dead Space 3 would probably have continued to respect its predecessor's survival horror roots and potentially would have secured funding for a sequel, one of which had already been planned ahead for. Details of this sequel included an increased focus on non-linear progression and emphasis on forcing players to scrounge around abandoned ships to collect the basic necessities for survival. Basically, the exact opposite of what we got in Dead Space 3. Now, I'm not saying that Dead Space 3 is a bad game, but it was something that was a marked departure for the series, and it made it a marked man amongst EA when it came time to crunch the numbers. And there we go, those were 10 franchises that EA has killed that would still make millions of bing bang bong bang bazinga beans, or whatever you call your currency. So let me know down below in the comments section if you would like any of these franchises to make a return, and let's just get a petition to EA. And as always, I've been Jules. You can follow me at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon.